The ballroom fell silent because of a child. Hundreds of guests had gathered beneath glittering chandeliers inside the Moretti Palace, where politicians toasted beside billionaires and notorious crime bosses pretended to be respectable businessmen. No one dared interrupt the evening. No one dared speak without permission. Then a tiny voice shattered the silence. "Excuse me." Every head turned. A little girl, no older than 6, stood in the middle of the grand marble floor wearing a faded blue dress that was clearly too small for her. One of her shoes had been stitched together by hand. Her dark curls framed a face that looked far too hopeful for a room filled with dangerous people. She wasn't looking at the celebrities. She wasn't looking at the politicians. She was looking only at one man, Damien Moretti, the most feared mafia boss in the country, a man whose name alone could end wars, or start them. His bodyguards instinctively reached for their weapons as the child walked closer. No one was allowed within 10 feet of Damien. Not without permission. The little girl stopped directly in front of him. She tilted her head and smiled. "Can I borrow you for one day?" Silence. The orchestra stopped playing. Champagne glasses froze halfway to waiting lips. Even Damien's captains looked stunned. Nobody asked the Ghost King for anything. People begged. People negotiated. People feared him. But no one had ever asked to borrow him. The little girl continued before anyone could pull her away. "My mommy has to work tomorrow." She looked down at her worn shoes. "And fathers are supposed to come to family day." Her tiny voice trembled. "I don't have one." Across the ballroom, a serving tray crashed onto the floor. A young maid stood frozen in horror. Clara Bennett, 27 years old. Quiet, hard-working, almost invisible to everyone who lived inside the palace. Her face turned completely pale. She rushed toward her daughter, but 2 security guards instinctively blocked her path, unsure whether to protect the child or remove her. "Please," Clara whispered. "I'm so sorry. My daughter doesn't understand." Damien slowly raised one hand. The guards immediately stepped back. He never took his eyes off the child. "What is your name?" "Lily." "And why did you ask me?" The little girl smiled with heartbreaking innocence. "Because you're the only man who always says yes when people need help." A few guests nearly laughed. Others looked terrified. If only she knew. Damien Moretti was famous for saying no. No mercy. No second chances. No forgiveness. Yet somehow, this little girl believed he was kind. Damien looked toward Clara. She stood shaking, unable to meet his eyes. She expected to lose her job. Perhaps worse. Instead, Damien noticed something no one else did. The little girl's backpack. Pinned to it was a paper badge reading, "Family Day tomorrow." The edges had been folded so many times they were beginning to tear. Lily had clearly carried it everywhere. Waiting. Hoping. Damien's expression remained unreadable. Then he asked a question no one expected. "Where is your father?" The child's smile faded. "He went to heaven." The room grew even quieter. Clara closed her eyes. Fighting tears she refused to let fall in front of the guests. Before another word could be spoken, Damien's chief of security hurried across the ballroom. His voice remained low enough that only Damien heard him. "Boss, we've identified the assassin." He entered disguised as catering staff. The atmosphere changed instantly. Hidden bodyguards spread through the ballroom. Exit doors silently locked. Guests noticed nothing. Only Damien did. Someone had chosen tonight to kill him. His gaze swept across hundreds of faces. Business partners, politicians, musicians, servers. Any one of them could be carrying a weapon. Then something unexpected happened. Lily quietly tugged on Damien's sleeve. "Don't stand there." He looked down. She pointed toward the enormous crystal chandelier hanging above the dance floor. "My mummy says broken ropes always make funny noises." Damien's instincts took over. He stepped away from his position without hesitation. Less than 2 seconds later, the chandelier crashed exactly where he had been standing. Glass exploded across the ballroom. Screams filled the air. Bodyguards surrounded Damien. Guests ran for the exits. Somewhere in the chaos, a sniper fired. The bullet struck empty marble. Had Damien ignored the little girl's warning, it would have hit his heart. The assassin escaped into the confusion. Security teams flooded the palace. Within minutes, they discovered the chandelier's support cables had been deliberately cut. It hadn't been an accident. It had been the opening move of a carefully planned assassination. As doctors checked injured guests, Damien looked toward Lily. She wasn't frightened. She was staring at the shattered ceiling, quietly thinking, almost calculating. Then she whispered something to her mother. Clara's face instantly drained of color. She tried to cover her daughter's mouth. Too late. Damien had already heard it. The man with the red tie did it. Security immediately searched the ballroom. There was no man wearing a red tie. Not anymore. He had disappeared before the attack. An hour later, surveillance footage confirmed something impossible. A waiter wearing a red tie had entered the ballroom. Second before the chandelier fell, he had vanished into a restricted corridor. No camera ever captured him leaving. Damien's investigators couldn't explain it, but one question refused to leave his mind. How had a 6-year-old girl noticed the only clue that an army of trained security professionals had completely missed? And why did it feel as though this wasn't the first time Lily had seen someone trying to kill a mafia boss? The shattered ballroom was evacuated within minutes, but Damien Moretti refused to leave. Broken crystal covered the marble floor like ice while investigators reconstructed the assassination attempt piece by piece. His captain searched every inch of the palace. Every employee was questioned. Every guest's movements were traced. Nothing explained how the assassin had disappeared. Only one clue remained. A 6-year-old girl had seen what hundreds of trained guards had missed. Across the palace, Clara held Lily tightly inside a quiet servant's quarters. Her hands trembled as she packed a small suitcase. She wasn't preparing for another shift. She was preparing to disappear. For years she had lived quietly, avoiding attention, accepting long hours and impossible expectations. The palace had never been home, but it had been the safest place she could find. Tonight changed everything. Lily had spoken in front of the most dangerous man in the country. Now everyone would notice them. A knock echoed against the door. Clara froze. Damien himself stepped inside. No bodyguards. No weapons drawn. Only the same unreadable expression that had terrified Rival for years. His gaze settled on the suitcase. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Clara lowered her eyes. "My daughter doesn't understand how dangerous this world is." "No," Damien replied quietly. "I think she understands more than either of us." Before Clara could answer, another explosion shook the palace. The eastern security gate erupted into flames. Automatic alarms screamed through the estate. Dozens of black SUVs smashed through the outer barricades. The Black Viper cartel had arrived, not to conquer the palace, to take one child. Within seconds, Damien's soldiers flooded the corridors while guests who had not yet left were rushed into underground shelters. Snipers occupied rooftops. Armored vehicles surrounded the estate. The attack had been planned with military precision. Every assault team ignored Damien's command center, ignored his vaults, ignored his weapons. Every intercepted communication repeated the same command: "Secure the girl alive." Clara's face turned pale. She whispered the word she had feared for years. "They found us." Damien turned sharply. "You knew this day would come." She closed her eyes. "I prayed it never would." Gunfire thundered outside. Walls shook under repeated explosions. Damien immediately escorted Clara and Lily through hidden corridors known only to the Moretti family. As they descended into reinforced tunnels beneath the palace, Lily suddenly stopped walking. She looked at one security camera mounted near the ceiling. "That man isn't one of yours." Everyone followed her gaze. On the monitor, a wounded palace guard leaned against a wall. His uniform looked perfect, except for one detail. His wedding ring had moved to the opposite hand. Damien's expression hardened. The guard wasn't his man. He was wearing another man's uniform. Before anyone could react, the disguised assassin opened fire through the surveillance room. 3 Moretti soldiers fell instantly. The tunnel erupted into chaos. Damien eliminated the attacker before he reached the family, but the realization spread through every commander. The enemy had already infiltrated the palace hours before the ballroom attack. Someone had helped them. Somewhere inside Damien's own organization lived a traitor. As emergency convoys escaped into the countryside, Damien reviewed every piece of intelligence collected during the night. Nothing connected. Nothing except Lily. Every attacker risked everything for her. Every plan revolved around her. None of it made sense. Hours later, the convoy stopped inside an abandoned monastery converted into a secure safe house. For the first time since the attack, Damien finally asked Clara the question she had spent years avoiding. Who is Lily's father? Silence. Clara stared through the broken stained glass windows. I don't know. Damien didn't believe her. She noticed immediately. I know how impossible that sounds. Then explain. Years earlier, Clara had worked as a nurse inside a private research facility operating under a false charitable foundation. The patients weren't sick. They were children who displayed extraordinary observational abilities, pattern recognition, memory, spatial awareness. Researchers treated them like experiments rather than human beings. Clara secretly helped several children escape. Most disappeared forever. One infant remained. No records. No parents. Only a bracelet carrying a single name. Lily, unable to abandon the child. Clara fled with her and disappeared into the Moretti palace under a false identity, believing the Mafia state was the last place anyone would think to search. She had been wrong. Before Damien could absorb the revelation, one of his captains burst into the room. His face had gone completely white. Boss! We identified who betrayed us. Damien expected the name of a corrupt commander. Instead, the captain placed surveillance photographs onto the table. They showed Damien's trusted chief of security secretly meeting representatives of the Black Viper cartel for months. The man responsible for protecting the palace had been guiding every attack. The betrayal cut deeper than any bullet. Before Damien could issue orders, every communication device inside the monastery activated simultaneously. A distorted voice filled every room. You protected her long enough. Every screen displayed live drone footage. The safe house, their vehicles, their exact positions. The enemy already knew where they were. Then another image appeared. The chief of security stood bound to a chair inside an unknown warehouse. Bruised, terrified, he shouted desperately before masked soldiers silenced him. I wasn't the mastermind. I only followed orders. The distorted voice returned. The real traitor is still standing beside Damien Moretti. Every person inside the room instinctively looked at everyone else. Trust collapsed in an instant. Weapons were quietly lowered toward former allies. No one knew who to believe. In the confusion, Lily walked to the window. She stared toward the surrounding mountains. Then she quietly pointed to a distant ridge. They are already here. Seconds later, rockets streaked across the night sky. The monastery exploded into flames. Black Viper forces stormed from 3 directions while another convoy bearing an unfamiliar insignia appeared from the opposite valley. A second criminal empire had entered the hunt. Caught between 2 rival organizations, Damien realized the attack on his palace had never been the real battle. It had only been the invitation. And as bullets tore through the ancient monastery, Lily looked toward the approaching soldiers with a strange mixture of fear and recognition, as though one of the men leading the assault already knew exactly who she was. Dawn had not yet broken when the burning monastery fell silent. The mountain roads were littered with abandoned vehicles, shattered stone, and the remains of 2 criminal armies that had underestimated one small family. Damien Moretti's surviving soldiers regrouped inside an old railway tunnel carved through the cliffs decades earlier. Ammunition was running low. Communications had been jammed. Every safe house had been compromised. For the first time in years, the Ghost King had nowhere left to retreat. Clara sat against the cold stone wall, holding Lily close. The little girl had finally fallen asleep, exhausted after a night of explosions and endless running. Damien looked at the child differently now, not as someone to protect because she was innocent, but because someone powerful feared what she represented. His intelligence chief finally arrived carrying a recovered encrypted drive taken from one of the enemy commanders. The files are damaged, he said, but one recording survived. The video began. Inside an expensive office, several powerful figures argued over a classified research program that had been shut down years earlier. Children with extraordinary observational abilities had been gathered from different countries, not to create soldiers, to create living intelligence systems. They could detect patterns, identify deception, predict behavior, and notice microscopic details that trained investigators routinely missed. Every child had eventually disappeared, except one, Lily. The final experiment. The recording revealed another truth. Clara had never kidnapped Lily. She had saved her. She had carried the infant out of the facility during a fire that destroyed most of the evidence, sacrificing her own career and spending years hiding from the organization that wanted the child back. Damien slowly closed the laptop. Everything Clara had risked, she had done alone, without recognition, without protection. Before anyone could speak, distant engines echoed through the tunnel. Not one convoy, dozens. The Black Viper cartel had found them again. So had the mysterious second organization. This time they arrived together. The temporary alliance between the two factions had one purpose: capture Lily before sunrise. Damien stepped outside. His remaining soldiers lined up beside him despite being vastly outnumbered. Behind him stood Clara. She looked toward the approaching armies, then quietly handed Damien a small notebook. It belonged to the research director. Inside were years of coded observations. Not about Lily, about the people funding the project. Every politician, every billionaire, every criminal financier, every secret payment. The notebook was a roadmap to the corruption connecting governments and organized crime. Whoever possessed it controlled the future. Suddenly Damien understood. Lily had never been the real prize. The people hunting her believed Clara still possessed a notebook because she had escaped with a child on the same night. They had spent 6 years chasing the wrong treasure. The enemy commander stepped forward beneath a white flag. Hand us the notebook. No one else dies. Damien smiled for the first time in days. You've already lost. Minutes earlier, while the enemy advanced toward the tunnel, his hackers had quietly transmitted copies of every page to investigative journalists, financial regulators, and international law enforcement agencies across multiple countries. The information could no longer be buried. The commander realized it instantly. His expression collapsed. Years of planning had unraveled in a single decision. Furious, he ordered the assault. The valley erupted. Explosions rolled across the mountains. Bullets carved through rock walls. Damien's smaller force fought with desperate precision, while the two rival organizations struggled to reach the tunnel. Then Lily did something no one expected. She quietly pointed toward the unstable cliffs above the battlefield. Those rocks! They are going to fall. Damien trusted her without hesitation. He ordered an immediate retreat through a maintenance shaft moments before artillery fire shook the mountainside. The cliffs collapsed. Thousands of tons of rock crashed into the valley below. Roads disappeared beneath stone. Armored vehicles were crushed. The advancing armies became trapped beneath their own attack. By the time rescue helicopters arrived hours later, the alliance had ceased to exist. Surviving commanders blamed one another for the disaster. Their partnership dissolved into open warfare. Within days, authorities used Clara's notebook to dismantle the financial empire that had funded the research program for years. Bank accounts were frozen. Corrupt officials resigned. Several crime syndicates collapsed after losing the money that had secretly sustained them. The consequences spread far beyond the underworld. Months later, the Moretti Palace looked different. Its gates remained guarded. Its walls remained imposing. But the fear that had once ruled every corridor had begun to fade. Damien had changed. He no longer measured strength by how many enemies feared his name. He measured it by how many innocent people no longer had to hide because of his decisions. Clara accepted a new role overseeing charitable foundations that secretly relocated vulnerable children away from criminal networks, ensuring no one would endure what Lily had survived. She was no longer an invisible maid. She became someone whose quiet courage reshaped an empire. As for Lily, she finally attended her long-awaited family day. Not inside a palace, not surrounded by armed guards, just beneath bright school decorations, laughing beside children who never knew the dangerous world she had escaped. When another student asked who had come with her, she smiled and pointed toward the adults waiting nearby. Clara stood proudly beside Damien, not because titles or power had brought them together, because they had chosen to protect the same future. The story of the little girl who asked to borrow the Mafia Boss spread through whispers across the underworld. Some claimed she had saved his life. Others insisted she had destroyed 2 criminal empires. The truth was simpler. A fearless child reminded the coldest man alive that the strongest empire isn't built through fear. It's built by protecting the people who have no one else. And sometimes, the smallest voice in the room is the one powerful enough to change everyone's destiny.